Mark Carney ran and won on elbows up, and his most recent visit to the White House has put that promise to the test. On today's episode, we're going to break down Carney's visit with Trump and how the president continues to define the political narrative in Canada. Welcome to the Spin Nation podcast. So, Emmanuel, here we are. We are on episode 20. We're on today because it was an interesting press conference that Mark Carney had with Donald Trump. This seemed to come out of nowhere.
Right. I think the announcement was like last Wednesday or Thursday, so within a week, that this particular meetup was announced, and so very, very quick by international meeting standards. So Carney shows up at the White House, and they had a very cordial interview on the Trump show. What stands out for you, Laurel, in terms of what are, before the spin gets applied, what are the positive and negative elements from that are coming out in terms of narrative from that meeting?
As you said, this was pretty quickly announced, like just, what was it, like the end of the week before that Mark Carney was heading down to have this meeting with Trump. But then they were starting to manage expectations. I think that once the word got out that Carney was going down, the speculation about what is this meeting for began. And does this mean that they're going to be announcing a deal? And there was, let's say, a managing of expectations that don't expect a deal. So the question is, well, what's he going down for? Like, what was the purpose of this engagement? Was it that Donald Trump had a hole in his calendar and decided, like, what can we fill here? And then, okay, well, people are asking about Canada. Let's get Mark Carney down here. He'll pop on over. I mean, that part was never made very clear.
Yeah, and that's my primary theory. On the Trump show, you kind of need something every day to fill that. And it might have been that there was a gap in the schedule. And, well, that's what you do on, morning shows when you don't have a big story that occupies the front page. You go dig into your box of contacts and you find the next celebrity, that's available for that schedule. So that's my theory, number one.
So Carney's a seat filler?
A seat filler. I mean, that's what it was, right? It was filler. There was no announcement. It was just, hey, you're a great guy and you're also a great guy. Mm-hmm. And we have nothing to say except we'll tell our teams to work faster. That's theory number one. I have a mini theory number two, that they're meeting for some other purposes. We keep hearing about, the Golden Dome and some of the defense stuff. So maybe just saying that this meeting was about the trade negotiations, but in reality, it's for some other topic, perhaps some geopolitics that they needed to discuss privately and quietly. So that'd be my theory number two. I'm still leaning towards the first one. It's the Trump show, and they needed a guest, and Carney was the closest and fastest they could to fill that gap.
So let's talk about what is some of the themes that were raised. So then they do the press conference before the actual meeting. And the thing about Trump's press conferences are that you don't really know what he's going to talk about. And then, of course, the media are going to pose the questions that they want to pose. Some key themes that are coming out are he wanted to talk about Israel and Gaza, that was something that was very important for both leaders to connect on, but it wasn't clear in what context. Now, Mark Carney was incredibly flattering to the president about his peacemaking. Now, it's no secret that Trump is vying for the Nobel Peace Prize. And he was very flattering, not just with Israel and Gaza, but named a number of different conflicts as well that Trump had been engaged on. Obviously, trade and tariffs is going to be a topic that they covered. But then a lot of it was Trump going off on ICE and going off on immigration. They talked a bit about security, but a much more flattering engagement than we normally see.
It's a love-in, and both parties lavish the praise, and I mean that. And I'm kind of puking a little bit at the back of my mouth as I say that.
So look, those were the main themes that were coming out of it. But more than that, I would say where there were buzzwords and slogans. You know how Trump likes to come up with words to characterize people. For example, he called Mark Carney a tough negotiator. That got a lot
Tough
of pickup.
negotiator, yes.
World
Also
class
called him a
leader.
world-class leader. Yeah, a
World
great
class leader.
man.
That I saw that. So instead of the name calling where he does this with his political opponents, he's branding with this terminology. And when we get into the spin that came out after this press conference, it was tough for the conservative right-wing anti-Carney crowd to spin this one.
That's a fact. I reviewed a few of the emerging voices on the podcast world to see how they treated that, and it was a challenge indeed. When it comes to Canada, the other positive message, at least as the words are today, he did mention that Canada, or Trump mentioned that Canada was going to walk away happy, that they were going to treat Canada fairly. So that should be music to the ears of Canadian listeners who are all, very nervous about where this trade war is heading.
Yeah, a lot more conciliatory, a lot more, hey, we're going to compete in areas and that's okay. And both leaders were saying, I understand the other leaders' perspective on this, and it's a very fair and reasonable approach, and we'll figure out something. So, could it have been that the goal of this press conference was just to calm markets about the length that it's taking this particular trade negotiation to take? I mean, that was a question that a reporter asked, like, why is this taking so long when the U.S. has made deals with these other countries? And Trump and Carney both gave, well, there's very reasonable and rational explanations for this, and nobody's in any rush, and everybody would rather have a good deal than a fast deal, and that's okay. So maybe that was the goal of this whole theater that they put on, was just to calm those markets.
So I'd push it back a little bit on that, because all stock market figures have been going up and up and up for the last 2-3 months. So I don't get any sense that markets or investors were particularly nervous about this topic.
The way I phrased it is wrong. It's not that, like, oh, the markets are popping up and down, but I think it's investor confidence in general, right? So it's confidence that North America, I mean, we include Mexico that in that, but this is still a safe place to invest as a company, because there's going to be policy certainty. And the huge issue for most companies is the uncertainty of not having a deal. So I'm sure Trump is hearing about it from his own industries in the US, because they've been set up in this way of this cross-border moving of goods with such ease, and he wants them to invest. Like, he wants them to build, he wants them to create more factories, and they're probably telling him, look, we'll be happy to, but you gotta, like, stable the ship here so that we know what we're investing in.
That's a good point, because Mark Carney at some point was interjecting. Trump was saying something about there's some conflicts that we need to resolve. And Mark Carney actually interrupted Trump to say, well, if I may, these are not really conflicts. They're more like competitive areas that we have where we compete for the same business. Mm-hmm. So he was trying to reframe around that competitive issue, which reflects what you're saying. We need to figure out how investment is directed, and if it is or not an area of competition. Like, the car industry is very integrated. We're actually not really competing, I guess, except for workers and where the work happens. So yeah. So could that be an area that we could just take off the table and just agree to not tariff, because it's an integrated economy?
Well, that's a big question, right? So is steel and others. Okay, so
very relevant to Ontario in particular.
For sure. So in the interim, Doug Ford is, I don't know, throwing a tantrum. smashing
Yeah,
bottles.
yeah. But still, I'm very unclear what was the purpose of the entire meeting. You know, we got a statement from Carney's office on Wednesday that was issued, so the day after, and it's like the two sides have been quote unquote directed their teams to conclude this work in the coming weeks. So
No, we've heard that before. They've had
yeah,
deadlines and missed them.
could this be this meeting? Could it have been an email? Sounds like, at least from this perspective. You've collected some of the numbers when it comes to news and X, and I've looked a little bit at some of the key folks on YouTube and the podcast world. So, what are some of the findings from your end, Laurel?
So let's start with this idea of like the world class leader. So what we have here is we're looking at a month. And this is the whole conversation about Carney as a leader, and it is like non-existent, like not on the radar. Barely anyone's mentioning it. But I've also broken it out by, is Carney called a good leader, Carney called a bad leader? And just for clarity, this could be in the good category, could mean strong, smart, obviously included world class, a lot of those positive descriptor words. And same thing for bad. So it could also include weak, stupid, arrogant, whatever. And like, boom, you can see the jump up of Carney being referred to as a good, a strong, great leader. And it's a direct relation to Trump calling him world class. Now, of course, there's a little bit of people trying to counter that with language about being a bad leader, but it's pretty small, relatively speaking.
Okay, so it sounds like Trump did a solid for Carney.
Well, I think to me that's what we're going to show overall is how much Trump influences the Canadian political discourse here. Because by him using this very flattering language, I mean, we leapt on it and jumped on it. Look what Trump called him. Look what he called him. And the same is true when we look at him as a negotiator. So that he's called him a tough negotiator, and it has a similar trajectory. The difference on the negotiation one is that this was a little bit more in the conversation than the leadership one. Not a lot, but there was some conversation in the middle of the month about Carney being a bad negotiator. But again, this big jump at the end as a result of Trump calling him a tough negotiator, saying he would want Carney to represent him in a negotiation. So Carney really needed this. So he, as we've talked about in previous episodes, but also I cover a fair bit on my TikTok, Carney has been struggling with his narrative in terms of what's being defined about him or how people are referring to him or qualifying him as. And the narrative that's stickiest with to him is about being a globalist. So you actually don't see a lot of positive Carney conversation about how he's performing in his role right now. There's a ton of people attacking him, calling him a liar, calling him a globalist, calling him, corrupt, et cetera, et cetera. But on the positive side, not as much.
Yeah, I looked at some of the pods from the episodes from Moose on the Loose and Jasmine Lane and how they looked at this event. One thing I'll mention, because both of them really focused on how Carney wore a red tie in honor of Donald Trump and pointed it out when he was greeted, at the, I guess, the gates of the White House by Trump. And both of them were like, oh, look at, Carney, and he's selling out and he's elbows down and he's fawning over Trump. So part of their critique is, and I don't agree with this characterization, is that, Carney is falling over himself trying to negotiate with Trump. Well, the reality is, of course, that it's sort of the price you have to pay just to get into the White House is you got to you got to go over there and use loaded language to tell Trump how great a man he is. So that's definitely a thing. But when it comes to positioning the negative or putting a negative spin on the meeting, Moose on the Loose is really focused on the conflicts of interests of Mark Carney. For those who don't follow Moose closely, he has this massive mind map of all the relationships between Carney and Brookfield and everybody who's related to Brookfield. And he's like, it's one of those maps where you have the red string between all of the different entities as you're trying to map out who's the murderer and where that murderer is. So that's the Moose approach. And that's essentially how he characterized it. We're negotiating a deal with the US, and all of it is going to benefit Carney personally in his holdings and his investments and the investments of his buddies. So one term that came up a lot in that as part of that conversation is Carney's comment about making a $1 trillion investment in the U.S. So they really drew that out. And I notice today in question period, Pierre Poilievre is also using that as a direct attack line during question period. Did you run any of the numbers on the $1 billion? What did you see?
Yeah, it did come up. So it is not as big as the leadership and negotiation. So the positives coming out around Carney or how he's characterized by Trump, but it's there. I did a post about the press conference on TikTok today, and in the comments, people were referencing this 1 trillion. It's very reminiscent to me when they announced the Build Canada Homes, and I don't know if you remember at the time, he was saying, oh, there's $13 billion and, the first 40,000 homes or 4,000 homes. And people started coming up with this math of $3.25 million per home and running with it. To me, it's reminiscent of that.
Big headline, big numbers equals big headlines. But the problem is, of course, then you can manipulate that headline. And as far as I know, we have no idea what those numbers are coming from. This could be, everybody's personal investments, the pension fund investments. I mean, everybody needs a diversified portfolio. So of course there's money, going to Canada, some of it going to the US, some of it going to international. You always want a diversified portfolio. So it's unclear what that amount exactly is being pulled from. And that's being used by the opponents like Moose on the Loose as an attack point, a weak point in the conversation.
Well,
So
Trump
that
loves
was
those numbers, though, right? Because he always references them when he deals with Japan and Europe. They're going to invest $10 trillion in the U.S. as part of it. So,
that's
but
right.
yeah.
And I think, as is the case for Japan and Korea, I think like all of them have mentioned these huge numbers. And as far as I know, not a single country has actually spelled out what that money is and what it's being invested and who's behind the money. Like nothing at all has ever been clarified. But it feeds into Trump's speaking point. He loves to brag about how he's brought in $17 trillion into the U.S. economy.
Yeah.
So that was the approach for Moose on the Loose. I also looked at Jasmine Lane, where her position was a little more nuanced, or perhaps, at least for me, I was very confused listening to Jasmine around this. So she made a Twitter post, and she did a show today repeating that Twitter post, where she's calling out the Liberals and asking the question as to whether or not we're going to feel great once there's a deal with the U.S. And we elected, Carney to fight for us, but at the end of the day, he will have worked out a deal. So, I mean, we could put maybe that tweet here and on the screen for everybody to read. But I'm coming out of that particular attack line a little confused because I'm not sure. Like we elected Carney to deal with the trade war. If he actually comes out with a deal, that's what the mandate that I guess she's assuming was assigned to Carney. So I'm coming out. I get Moose on the Loose's point about potential corruption, and that's points to Moose. He's built the relationship between all the entities, and that's at least a convincing argument, whether you agree about it or not. I'm a little less convinced by Jasmine's take on it, just because um, I don't quite follow the logic here.
Well, I think that's an example of some of the conservative or right wing voices scrambling a little bit because Trump's he's the head of the class. So if you have always been consistently praising Trump, and for one thing, it's hard to for him to say all these amazing things about Carney and push back on that. That's number one. Number two, for these particular uh, creators that you mentioned, they're going to have a lot of Maple MAGA followers who for sure idolize Trump. So you got to be careful on, okay, what am I going to pick on? But Trump was sitting there next to Carney saying that trans kids and trans is a terrible thing. And people are saying, well, Carney's child is trans. I actually don't know if that's true or not. I didn't look. But they're trying to find like something to say that this wasn't good. So the Fox News, they were trying as well to pick up on stuff. And again, they're always trying to position Trump as the strong man because I think their audience loves that. So Trump did make a joke about merging the US and Canada, but it was so clearly a joke. It, if you actually watch the press conference, Carney was talking about something else, like one of the things we're going to achieve, and Trump pipes up, "We're going to merge the countries." I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But Fox was like, Trump surprises Carney with merger talks, and so they're trying to play it into something that will appeal to their audiences. But as you like to say, it was a bit of a nothing burger.
And I guess it served to fill the Trump show for the day, and everybody's struggling to really put a narrative on it.
Okay, well, let's do a quick so what.
Well, the so what? Yeah, this is a nothing burger, and there's nothing new. There's a little bit of an upside for Carney because he was cast in a positive light. I would definitely rank this as positive to Carney. Like you said, Carney is currently missing a positive narrative to counter all of the negative narratives, and he has not been able to issue a strong storyline out of all of the work that's been happening over the summer. But I would caveat that very quickly that Trump is mercurial, and this could be the story today, but he reads something in the paper tomorrow, and suddenly it's like 50% tariffs on maple syrup. So who knows? But overall, a slight positive towards Carney, and I think a helpful hand for his internal politics to Canada.
I agree with that. My question is his team able to then leverage this bump to maintain or to shift the conversation about him? My concern with the Carney Calms machinery is that they do these one-offs, but these little hits are not enough to keep a country on track and on side when you're trying to turn the entire big ship around. And to date, his communications team, whether they're not equipped, supported, he doesn't care. I don't know. We don't know why. But they do not have a clear strategy and plan that they're executing, to your point around narrative.
And I think, the other danger is that, it all comes out and here's my 22 point document to show you how we're going to take care of Canada. And then it's a 150-page document that nobody can ever read and understand fully. So that's the other danger of coming in with just a slew of disconnected announcements. So any words of advice? And communicate better.
Get your shit together. I mean, it's very clear. This isn't rocket science. I mean, this has been done time and time again, right? Like it's. I'm not saying it's not hard, but like it's very clear what needs to be done, but they just don't seem to be set up to do it.
All right,
Okay,
so that'll be the title of our episode this week. Pretty good trip to the U.S., but get your shit together.
get your shit together. Okay. Well, if you have not already, please subscribe, like, and share, comment. Anytime you can engage with us, it helps us keep our content going. As always, thank you, Manuel, and safe drive back to Port Hope tomorrow to come pick me up. And then we go
Look
home.
forward to seeing you again.
By the time you watch this, people, we will be home finally. Very excited. All right, well, until next time.
Until next time.